I mean, really, our ask is to stop acting as if the union doesn't exist and stop trying to push policy on us without negotiating first. I mean, the overtime thing, the status quo has been you work the overtime you need to do to get the job done. And what they're now telling us is you need to stop what you're doing and request to work more overtime. So whether you're covering a building collapse or, something is coming out of City Hall that's breaking, or you were covering something in federal court and now you have to start writing the story before the end of your shift, that's the directive. So we want them to stop with that. First of all, roll that back to the status quo. And then, other issues have come up where they've just tried to bulldoze their wishes through into being new policy without bargaining with us first. And that needs to stop too.
It's FAQ NYC, the New Yorkers podcast from the newsroom by and for New Yorkers, the city. I'm Katie Honan. Today, we are going to talk about a depressing topic, the journalism industry. On Tuesday, unionized staffers at Condé Nast held a one-day walkout as top management folded Pitchfork into GQ and promised across-the-board cuts at multiple publications. On the same day, more than 100 staffers at the Los Angeles Times were laid off following their work stoppage days ago. Last week, the Baltimore Sun was bought by a guy who said he's only read it a few times. Time Magazine cut staff this week. Sports Illustrated cut everyone. It's been a brutal month and a brutal decade plus for journalism. And things aren't looking much better here in New York City. The unionized staff at the Daily News, the country's first daily tabloid that has been the voice of working-class New York City since 1919, has lost more than 24 reporters and editors in recent years. They've kept reporting on the city despite chronic cuts from its hedge fund owner, Alden Global Capital. And this morning, they're walking off the job too, staging a 24-hour work stoppage to protest the slashes made to an already skeleton staff that still just want to report on the greatest city in the world. 3 of those reporters and union members are here today. Ellen Moynihan, a Metro reporter, Chris Sommerfeldt, who covers City Hall, and Michael Sheridan, who is the head of video at the Daily News. I guess thank you all 3 for joining us. I know it's a big day here and it's been a long road to this, but I just wanted to ask, and I'll start with you, Ellen. Mm-hmm. What message do you hope to get across to management and then I guess also to your readers with this work stoppage?
To the management, there's been too many cuts to the paper already. We can't sustain anymore. We're a tiny, tiny crew covering a city of over 8 million. And you keep hacking away at us. And, the latest things that they're doing don't help our coverage. I mean, you can't, this isn't an 8-hour-a-day job. People need more time than that. And to the city, we care about you. We want to keep covering you, but the management is making it really difficult for us.
And I know you've been at the Daily News around 8 years. If you want to first, and then I'll ask Chris and Michael, for readers who might not, people read the paper, they don't know what goes on behind the scenes, right? Even when things are great, they don't know what goes into making the news, whether it's reporting a story or making a video that tells a story. So if you want to describe life at the Daily News over the last, from Trunk, when the Trunk had bought it and onwards, what that has been like, because, I hear about it from all of you, but just sort of that daily, weekly cutting, if you want to just describe a little bit.
Well, it's changed even in the time that I've been there. I started in December 2015, and I was freelance for 6 years before I became staff. But I mean, we're New York's picture newspaper. We have no staff photographers. In the beginning, for the first several years, a reporter would go out on the streets to cover something or wherever they're going to cover it, and they would always be paired with a photographer. Those photographers, the last of them were laid off in 2018. It's take pictures with your cell phone camera. That's kind of the directive. Editors have left and not been replaced. Right now, we have no Metro editor since August of 2022. That's kind of unheard of. We have no newsroom. We have a WeWork. Well, I call it WeWork. It's Workville. It's a little office space in Midtown. that about 6 people can fit into. Um, I mean, we've gone from, I think it was 70 something in 2021 to now we're at 54 minus management. It's just shrunk and shrunk.
Chris, how about you? What's it? I guess what's the biggest effect that you've seen in your daily life with all of these cuts?
I mean, in addition to the stuff that Ellen's talking about, the latest kind of depressing wrinkle in this is management's attempt to completely eliminate overtime for us, which when we are as short-staffed as we are, as Ellen just alluded to, it's impossible to put out a paper unless people are working overtime. That includes myself, that includes all of the people on the print design team, that includes the people on Michael's side with photo. Without overtime, we can't do this anymore because of how short-staffed we are. And now they're saying no more overtime. So in reality, I don't even know how they envision continuing putting out a paper every day and continuing produce at the rate that we still do despite the staff shortages.
And Michael, head of video, and I know you also work in photo. What's that been like without any staff photographers?
Yeah, I mean, it's without, for the most part, I've watched the paper get dwindled down with the expectation that we're still supposed to do the same coverage. We don't have staff photographers, but we have very talented freelance photographers. We used to have a video department, which I used to run. We don't really have a video department anymore. I mean, for the most part, I'm a photo editor and I do some video editing. I've been at the Daily News for 17 years. I was a national desk editor. I was a reporter. There isn't a job there that I haven't done at this point. I used to even lay out some pages back in the day. It's not the idea that you could still do all those things today with the way they're running the staff, the way they've dwindled everything down is just difficult, if not impossible to continue in that vein. And it's very sad to see. I mean, watching it happen over these years, it's been sad to see them doing it.
And if you want to talk a little bit about, I guess the timeline of your bargaining. I've been following the tweets, and I know I hear from my friends and colleagues who are bargaining. What that has been like. I don't know if Ellen, if you want to start. I know sometimes they don't come to the table and just explain how that process has been.
Yeah, it's a long process. It's a drawn out process just by its nature. I mean, we're starting a contract from scratch with all the proposals necessary. Initially, we were trying to get in on what the other Tribune-owned papers, Chicago Tribune, Hartford Courant, Allentown Morning Call, had already achieved. They bargained together in something called the what is it called again? The joint table. So the Daily News was the last of the bunch to unionize. And we came to the table saying, great, we're going to ask to sign on to all the proposals that you guys had already agreed on. And they said, no, you're your own company. The New York Daily News is separate from all the other Tribune-owned papers. So we had to start literally from scratch. And that's been since that bargaining began before I came into the unit as a staff member. So I'm going to let somebody else start with that info, maybe Chris. When did we start bargaining?
We started bargaining, that's a good question. It's been nearly 2 years, right? And it feels like we've made some progress getting preliminary agreements on some low-hanging fruit for the contract, but the real meat and potatoes of the contract, wages, healthcare, economics, we haven't gotten anything on that, and it's been almost 2 years. And in large part, Ellen and the rest of the bargaining committee are doing most of the work on this, so I'm just kind of speaking secondhand here, but for the most part, it seems like that's by design. Alden's lawyers are delaying because that's what their aim is. They want to delay and delay and delay and delay, and rather spend untold amounts of money on lawyers doing that than actually paying for the wage increases and the solid contract that we deserve.
And if you want to just lay out a little bit about what you are asking for, I don't know if Michael, you have those, or whoever has it, just to explain a little bit about what are your biggest asks. I know you said they agreed to the lowest hanging fruit, but what are those big asks that they are not? And I'm sure in the larger scheme of things, they are not huge asks. But if you want to go into a little bit of detail about what you're asking for.
None of us have gotten a wage increase since bargaining started, obviously. Many of us have not gotten it, myself included, for 6 years now. Many of us got pay cuts during COVID that were never restored. So I think one of the most basic asks is just getting those cuts that all of us sustained reversed. And then as well as, getting, as all unionized workforces usually do, getting a set rate of a pay increase each year. And then beyond that, healthcare that actually provides us with the opportunity to go to the doctor without breaking the bank. And let me kind of toss it over to Ellen for some of the other specifics on that.
One of the biggest things that we need to accomplish is something called jurisdiction, and that's the right for guild members to perform all guild work at the paper. They're not agreeing to that. They want to be able to reassign our work to anyone at any time for any reason, and that gives us no job security. That's like a foundation of any contract. And we haven't quite gotten to the economic portion of the negotiations. We start off with the non-economic issues and then we move on. But I'll tell you right now, at the joint table, when they asked for a raise, they were told, you may not have a raise, you may have a bonus. And that is not going to fly in New York.
I wanted to ask, and again, whoever can chime in on this is, first we'll get into the larger context of what's happening to journalism today and where you view yourselves in that, because it's incredibly disheartening, what we all go through just trying to be reporters, and seeing what's happened this week and in previous weeks. Where do you view the Daily News in that? And then we'll get more into, what you'd like to, the kind of support and what you hope to get from readers on that. I don't know, Michael, if you want to start just for the interest of balance.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Daily News is in the position that most newspapers are, right? I mean, it's not an easy time to be a newspaper anywhere in the world, I'm sure, but especially in the United States. There are all sorts of financial issues that they all face. They were all facing them before any of these hedge fund people came in and started buying up properties. Digital overall has hurt newspapers. And the idea of them trying to find a way through that has been a challenge. And I think it gets worse when companies kind of come in and they're not interested in being media companies. They're only interested in owning property, right? And that's what Alden's game is. They're, for whatever their motivations might be, their interests are financial. They're not about the news. They're not about, journalism or any of that kind of stuff. They only care about money. And that's the sad part. And I wish there was an easier answer for newspapers all over to be able to find a way to be financially stable. I mean, the Daily News especially has been having financial problems for decades, for various reasons. But my dad was a reporter there, was a rewrite guy for 20 years. The Daily News has been part of my family for forever. And my dad actually was in the strike back in the 90s. So I would just like to believe that the Daily News can, be around for another 100 years. And that's what I'd like to see.
And I'll ask, because that brings me to the next question of the significance of the Daily News to New York City, especially I think a certain faction of the working class. I always tell the story of when I was growing up, my dad would give me money to get the newspaper, and it was the paper meant the Daily News, right? Everything else, we didn't get the Post, New York Newsday when it was still around, the Times was for weekends, but the Daily News is the paper. So I wanted to ask all three of you, what would you like to see readers do today, right? I know it's a work stoppage. I had to explain to my dad, don't read the newspaper. Don't read it on your Kindle that I set up for you. So what do you want in terms of support? And why would this walkout matter to them, to both readers and then just New Yorkers in general? What do you want to hear from them? And then also, what can we expect during this walkout?
Well, it's funny because I think we were talking about some of the walkout stuff of reaching out. This is the best example I can have of celebrities to try to get some support there. But I've always kind of looked at it like, well, it's always a hit or miss with celebrities, right? Because we probably pissed a few off over the years. I don't think Alec Baldwin's going to be coming out and rushing to our defense. But I think the key part is it's not just so much about the Daily News, but it's about news in general, right? It's about supporting journalism and newspapers, because newspapers are like the backbone of information. And if you're not going to support newspapers, then you're supporting whatever crazy internet person is going to claim they're a news person, or commentators on cable television. Those aren't news people. Those are commentators who are interested in making people crazy. The real stories, the city hall coverage, the crime stories, the stories that actually impact local communities and individual people, that comes from newspapers. And that's really the most important thing. I mean, maybe you don't always like what they cover, but the important thing is that they're there to hold people accountable and to expose things that need to be shown, that some people would like to stay in darkness, and you got to bring it out into the light. And that's what newspapers do. And that's why you need to support local journalism. And that's what the Daily News is. It's the New York hometown paper. We need that kind of stuff. We need those sorts of institutions to continue to exist for everybody.
Also, what supporters and readers can do today as we're walking out, beyond not reading the Daily News for today, we have a petition that's going to be circulating that we encourage everyone to sign if they want to protect the Daily News and support us. And we also have a GoFundMe page where we're going to be raising funds for union members who are going to be financially impacted from this walkout. So both of those are direct actions that supporters and readers should definitely consider supporting today.
I do want to ask, and I'll ask each of you individually, right? So today you're walking out, and it's been incredibly stressful dealing with all of this bargaining. But in between that, you every single day you work, you get up, and you're grinding, and you're doing your job. I think of someone like Ellen. You're covering breaking news. You're talking to people on the worst day of their lives because it's an important thing for the city to know about. Chris, you're dealing with harassment from the mayor of New York every single day. And Michael, you're also kind of putting together all these stories in a concise way for people to consume. So we'll start with you, Ellen. What keeps you motivated to continue doing the job while fighting just for the opportunity to do it, fighting with the people who are technically paying you to do it?
I mean, they're both kind of the same thing to me. I get to tell the stories of New Yorkers, and you're right. I get to talk to people on the worst days of their lives, and people open their doors to me and they invite me in, and I sit down and I talk with them about whatever traumatic thing has occurred in their life. I'm telling their story, and I am part of the union, and I am on the bargaining committee, so I can continue to do that. So this paper doesn't turn into a wisp and fly off in the wind. And there's actually, somewhere. We don't want a New York where the only other daily tabloid is the New York Post. You know what I mean? We need the point of view of the Daily News. We need that in New York.
And Michael kind of touched on this too, but I think daily newspapers in a large city like New York are crucial for holding power to account. And when we have a shrinking media market like this, I think the Daily News plays a critical role in reporting on city government, on reporting on politics and things that might otherwise go completely uncovered due to the state of the media market. And, I've always considered that a privilege to be able to do that, at the same time as I think that it's an essential part of how the city should operate. Without it, I think the city would be worse off. New Yorkers would be worse off. A lot of things would be worse off without that type of coverage.
I just look at it as I like what I do, and I like the job, and I believe that it's important that there be good news coverage. In terms of how I balance that with being part of the union and part of the bargaining committee is I respect all the people that we're dealing with. I have no personal issue with management or the company per se. I don't agree with decisions they're making. And in terms of being in the union, our job is to do what's best for the employees and that's a dual thing, right? It's about making the Daily News a place people want to be at and want to work at, and make it something that it makes it possible for people to work there without having to do 3 other jobs, but also to make sure that the Daily News can continue to do what people rely on it to do, which is to convey news and information and provide people with the details about what's going on in the city, and help them know what's important or what to care about, or that something, this person's doing something wrong. I mean, look at the George Santos scenario. You want the prime example of what happens when you don't get proper news coverage. You get a guy like that elected who was who seemed to be completely disingenuous of who he actually was. So I mean, I think news and coverage is important. Local news matters, and that's what keeps me motivated and keeps me going. That that means something, and I'm willing to do what is necessary in order to fight for it.
And for the listeners, it's Thursday morning when this is dropping. How can they support you? I know there's a picket. If you want to give some more directions on if people do want to come out, Alec Baldwin, if you're listening, come out and support. I know you're having a rough time, but come out and support. He used to have a podcast and news. So anyone else who wants to go out and support, if you want to just give that little.
That would be the greatest thing in the world if Alec Baldwin, of all the people in the world, it's like only Nixon can go to China. Alec Baldwin showing up to support the Daily News would be a headline. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we're starting the day with a picket at 10 a.m. outside 1412 Broadway. That is not the Daily News newsroom, because unfortunately we no longer have one. It was shut down during the pandemic and never reopened. That's where we have the Workville space. That's where we have to go and picket. That's what we're doing. Picket rally at noon, and then we're going to picket a little more until 2 p.m. So we'll be there basically from 10 to 2. Anyone wants to come by, support us, that would be lovely. We're going to have some speakers from our union and also from a couple of other locals. And we are going to have Scabby the Rat.
That's the only draw. That's the only thing I care about. Either Scabby the Rat or, have you seen the fat cat smoking a cigar? Ellen, Chris, and Michael from the Daily News, hardworking reporters and hardworking union members. Thank you for joining me and sharing what you've been going through. And, listeners, please support. If you're listening, I'm going to presume you like local journalism. So I thank you for listening and find ways to support. Thanks, all 3 of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
FAQ. FAQ NYC is part of the city, a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom dedicated to hard-hitting journalism that serves the people of New York and is freely available to everyone. Find it all at thecity.nyc. The pod receives support from P&T Knitwear, an independent bookstore, cafe, and event space on Manhattan's Lower East Side with a podcast studio that can be freely reserved for community use. And the pod is an affiliate of the Colin Powell School of CUNY City College, where our co-host, Dr. Christina Greer, is one of the Moynihan Public Scholars inaugural fellows. And we're an affiliate of the Flaming Hydra newsletter, a collective of 60 writers and artists, including me, Harry Siegel, delivering a cooperatively owned newsletter to your inbox that you'll actually want to open. See more and subscribe at flaminghydra.com. Our host this episode was the great Katie Honan. I'm our executive producer, and our engineer is the inimitable Adam Camara. A special thank you to our guests, Ellen Moynihan, Chris Sommerfeldt, and Michael Sheridan of the New York Daily News, New York's hometown paper. Thank you, listener, for joining us and making it this far. Be kind, be easy, and we'll be back soon with more.